Hey guys, I'm so sorry for the huge time delay. Anyway, let's just get started, alright? Let's just get into it. I'm reading The Way You Used to Do by Edemaru. Chapter 2. Bakugo's not really imaginary, not really friend. When Katsuki woke up, he didn't remember what had happened to him. There was some sort of bandage enveloping his head and a constant dull throbbing, making it hard for him to focus on his surroundings. And when he finally dared to blink his eyes open, the bright light sent a stab of pain across his skull. He hissed loudly, squeezing his lids shut and grinding his teeth. God, he hated concussions. He didn't remember how he had gotten himself concussed, though, which is why he attempted to open his eyes again. Knowing what to accept this time, the pain wasn't so unbearable. He blinked his crimson eyes several times until they finally regained focus, and found himself staring up at the unmistakable ceiling of Recovery Girls Medical Center. Kachan? A hesitant voice called from somewhere beside him. Katsuki felt annoyance blossom in his chest, but turned his head toward the nerd, already putting on a scowl. Deku's face lit up in relief once Katsuki's eyes focused on him, sighing and allowing his shoulders to drop. Oh, you're awake again, he breathed out, a shy smile appearing on his lips. He looked pale. What do you mean again? Katsuki growled, voice hoarse and throat aching. He shifted on the bed with difficulty, pushing himself into a more seating position. Izuku looked like he wanted to help him, but changed his mind before he could. Fuck, my throat is sore. Is there any water around, nerd? He glared at Deku, who looked away with an embarrassed expression. How are you feeling? Izuku asked, instead of answering Katsuki's question. He didn't meet his eyes as he spoke. Shitty and thirsty, Katsuki spat out simply, already feeling grumpy and annoyed. The throbbing headache he was being forced to deal with wasn't exactly helping with his already sore mood. You gonna grab me that water or what? He asked in an angry tone, because he was physically incapable of saying things like please and thank you to Deku of all people. However, his venomous request only made Izuku blush and turn his head away, some color finding its way to his deathly pale face. Katsuki didn't like that. The wider Deku's face looked, the more his ridiculous freckles stood out. Kachan, Izuku found the courage to start, but was interrupted by the door of the room opening. Katsuki had been expecting to see Recovery Girl coming in, but the sight of his parents making their way to his bed placed a frown on his face, and sent a twist to his heart. They wouldn't have come unless something serious had happened. Katsuki, his mother greeted, running a hand through his hair and staring down at him with a grim face. His father took the empty seat beside the bed and grabbed one of his hands, giving an almost apologetic look. Katsuki frowned in confusion. What are you two doing here? He asked, sounding a bit more aggressive than he had intended. His mother looked at him like she wanted to slap him for his insolence, whereas his father simply squeezed his hand. How are you feeling, son? He asked, offering Katsuki a smile so fake that something dreadful knotted the explosive boy's inside. What the hell was going on? Shitty and thirsty. He repeated the same thing he had told Deku, sparing the boy a pointed glare that read, see, maybe they'll do something about it. Like you, shitty nerd. Deku continued to eye him with a pale face and attentive eyes from where he was standing right beside Katsuki's mom, unusually silent. I'll grab you some water, his mom announced simply, turning on her heels and disappearing from Katsuki's vision. His father sighed audibly and lowered his head, looking conflicted. The sight made a renewed sense of anger and impatience sparkle inside him. Okay, what the hell is going on? He asked when his father gave no indication what he was about to speak up. And seriously, don't sugarcoat me. You know I can handle it, whatever this is, he added matter-of-factly. He looked at where Deku was still standing behind his father, searching the nerd's face for any indication of what was wrong, but the boy continued to look at him in silence, face full of sharp attention. His father stared up at him with that annoyingly apologetic expression again. What do you remember from yesterday, son? His father asked, cautious. Katsuki sighed and rolled his eyes, but he put a special effort in remembering what he could. I went out patrolling with shitty Deku, he said, after a few seconds of concentration, pointing Deku with a glare. We found a villain or something. I'm guessing I must have hit my head fighting him, because that's all I can remember. It's probably shitty Deku's fault, he snarled at the boy. His father frowned and looked over his shoulder at where Katsuki was staring, a concerned look on his face. He was probably worried Katsuki had hurt Deku's feelings or some crap. Deku, on the other hand, looked unbothered by the accusation. Katsuki, His father started at the same time. His mother entered the room again, a cup of room temperature water in her hands. He handed over his son without a word, staring at him as he took a sip. Katsuki twisted his nose. It's warm, he complained, staring down at the cup as if it personally offended him. The water did soothe his raspy throat, but he would rather have it cold. It's room temperature, his mother corrected with impatience, crossing her arms above her chest. Now shut up and drink it. You said you were thirsty. Cold water will only damage your throat further. Fine, whatever, he mumbled with annoyance, downing the rest of the water. His father sighed and used the interruption to recompose himself. Once Katsuki was done with the water, he handed the glass back to his mother, who took it silently. So? He urged them, neither of his parents giving any indication of telling him what had happened. Are you going to spit it out, or what? His father spared his mother a knowing glance, and turned back to him with another sigh, never letting go of his hand. Son, we're really sorry, his father said, in that teary-eyed, wobbly way that Katsuki most certainly didn't inherit from him, thank fuck. But your friend, Izuku, he hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words for that situation. Katsuki frowned. He's gone, son, he concluded, giving Katsuki's hand a squeeze. Behind him, his mother stood, face almost as impassive as ever. Katsuki could do nothing but blink up at them for moments that felt like an eternity, eyes darting between both his parents in obvious confusion, disbelief, and more than anything, indignation. He had never been a big fan of being made fun of. What the fuck are you two talking about? He asked, sounding angry, but not as aggressive as he would have liked to. The damn nerd is right beside you. He pointed at where Deku was standing beside his mother, looking even more pale, if that was even possible. His parents exchanged a worried look, which sent a renewed wave of fury across Katsuki. What, they thought they knew better than them? They thought he was crazy? Why the fuck did they have that pitying look on their faces? They can't see me, Kachan, Deku said simply, almost apologetically. So far, I think you're the only one who can. We understand this is difficult for you, his father continued, overlapping Deku's apology without paying any mind to the boy. Katsuki's frown deepened. We also know your relationship with Izuku hasn't been on the best of terms, but he's gone, son. He was brain dead when he arrived here. The only reason why they didn't shut off his life support is Inko and All Might didn't allow it, his mom concluded when his father trailed off. He looked sad, but her expression was angrier than anything. They refused to give up hope, but to all effects, the kid's gone. He shaded truthfully, simply. Okay, whatever this is, you gotta cut this shit right now, Tatsuki sobbed, impatiently, pointing at Deku again. If Deku's dead, how is he standing right there? I'm not a fucking basket case. I know what I'm seeing, he added, ignoring the jolt of fear that coursed through his heart at the possibility that he was actually starting to lose it and that Deku was actually dead. Son, like I said, we know this is hard, his father said again, ever the compassionate, comprehensive man. You hit your head pretty badly. You witnessed the whole thing firsthand. We understand. You can't take all the time you want to recover. Aizawa-sensei told us that you won't be punished for not attending classes until you're better. But the worst course of action you could take right now is denial, he said condescendingly. Katsuki fumed at this. It's not denial, he's right there, he shouted angrily, but his mother interrupted him before he could have a full-on angry breakdown that was very usual to the Bakudeku family. Look, kid, we get it. You treated Midoriya like shit, and now he died to save your ass. It's an awful situation. You must be feeling like crap and all that. But pretending it didn't happen won't help anyone, especially not you, she said with honesty, in that crude way that was so natural to her. The fastest way you accept what happened. Your fastest to move on. What the fuck do you mean he died to save me, old hag? Katsuki asked, indignity evident in his tone. I don't need to be saved by that piece of shit. He pointed an accusing finger at Izuku. He took a careful step closer to the bed. They can fucking talk to them already. Why can't they fucking see you? I don't know, Izuku said in that wobbly way Katsuki loathed so much. His lower lip was quivering nervously. Behind Izuku's approaching form, Katsuki's parents exchanged another look, as if trying to decide whether her son had lost his mind or not. But Hachan, you need to calm down or you'll make your concussion worse. Don't tell me what to do, nerd, Katsuki protested angrily, shoving the blankets off his legs and throwing them off the bed. Ready to stand up, march his way down to Deku and see for himself whether he was actually dead or not. Katsuki, you need to stay in bed, his father shouted in alarm, trying and failing to hold his son back. Katsuki got to his trembling feet and swayed for a second before regaining his composure and resuming his march out of the room. Kachan, Deku called after them in that exasperated tone of voice that got to Katsuki's nerves every time. You're going to hurt yourself. Can't you just listen to me for once? Shut the fuck up, Deku, Katsuki said over his shoulder, never ceasing his march. Katsuki, get back here right now, his father tried to grab him, but his mother stopped him with a warning hand. No, don't. Let him see for himself, she advised, eyeing her son with a stern look. Maybe it'll help him wake up and face reality at once. Where is he? Katsuki demanded with a growl, to which his mother rolled her eyes. Third room to your left, she provided simply, earning a distraught look from her husband. And brat, she added, before Katsuki could resume his march. He looked at her over his shoulder, ignoring the way the movement made his head sting. We all know you're strong, but don't let this take you down. Katsuki didn't bother to reply as she continued his march to Deku's room and shoved the doors open without knocking. The first thing he saw was the hunched, sobbing figure of Izuku's mother before the bed, and the way her head snapped up abruptly to Katsuki's sudden intrusion. Behind her, All Might stood, in his puny form, the grieving look on his face making his sulky cheeks look even more sunken. Then, on the bed, lied Izuku, covered in all sorts of wires, a tube shoved in his mouth, a scarred hand covered in bruises, his left arm enveloped in a cast, face pale, hair disheveled, and moving. A spark of memory appeared in Katsuki's head, of half-lidded green eyes and parted lips and death. He shuddered. Young Bakugo, All Might said sternly, shouldn't you be in bed? Instead of responding, Katsuki took a tentative step towards the bed. Horror etched on his face. Instead of turning his head to the side, he found Deku standing right beside him, a similar look on his own face. How could it be that Deku was lying and moving on the bed and standing beside Katsuki at the same time? Maybe he was, in fact, losing his mind. I hadn't seen it yet, Izuku whispered quietly beside him, eyes wide and teary. He looked worried. What? Katsuki asked, frowning. Why hadn't Deku tried to see his own body before this? I said, shouldn't you be in bed? All Might repeated, assuming Katsuki's question has been directed to him. You're not looking well, young man. You should rest and regain your energies you can recover. No, not you, Katsuki waved, a very impolite, dismissive hand at the man, eyes focused on Deku standing beside him. Why didn't you come here before? I tried, Izuku admitted, stepping closer to the bed and looking like he wanted to grab his own hand, but he was afraid to do so. But every time I tried to leave your side, I got pulled back, like a magnet, he whispered, awe etched on his face. That doesn't make any fucking sense, Katsuki scoffed. Why me? Why can't anyone else see you? I don't know, Izuku admitted quietly. Maybe it was because you were the only other person there when I was hit? He suggested half-heartedly. Young Bakugo, All Might called, concern evident in his features. Inko was also staring at Katsuki as if he had grown a second head. Who are you talking to? He asked, cautious. Katsuki huffed through his nose. To fucking Deku, he explained, trying his best to sound certain instead of delusional. He's standing right beside me. What? Inko startled, green eyes widening and lips quivering in a very Midoriya-like way. All Might placed a hand on her shoulder to ground her. You can see him? Where? Where's my baby? Mom. Izuku stepped in front of his mother, tears already pooling on his big, expressive eyes. He crouched in front of her, placing each hand on her knees affectionately. Mom, I'm right here, he said pleadingly, as if begging for her to see him. He's crouching in front of you, Katsuki informed coldly, watching the scene in front of him with impassive eyes. The sight of Deku's dead body on the bed was still unsettling, even if he was still breathing with the aid of the life support. Inko blindly reached for her invisible son, her hand running right through him. Izuku was as intangible as Mirio and as invisible as Hagakure. The only one who could see him was Katsuki. Your hand just ran through him, Katsuki announced in a flat tone, making Inko withdraw her hand from where it was stretched, as if it had been burned, a horrified look on her face. Izuku, did I hurt you? She asked frantically, eyes darting across the empty space in front of her in a desperate, fruitless attempt to find her son. Izuku lowered his head and shook it, shoulders slumping in disappointment. No, I didn't feel anything, he admitted, not bothering to look at Katsuki. He sounded miserable. He's fine. Katsuki relayed the information to the desperate mother, but sighed and rolled his eyes in annoyance. Look, I'm done playing carrier pigeon for you lot. Can anyone tell me what the fuck is going on? He asked with exasperation. Izuku stood up from his mother's feet and went back to looking at his body, a pensive look on his face. All Might looked conflicted. At the same time, Inko continued to look around the room helplessly, as if hoping Izuku would appear magically any moment now. Young Bakugo, All Might said finally, voiced heavy and constricted. Are you sure? He hesitated for a moment. Are you sure you're seeing young Midoriya? Yeah, Katsuki said, as if he was talking to a child who asked too many questions. An offended look passed through his face. What, you think I'm a nutcase? He scoffed angrily, recalling his parents' reaction mere minutes before. I don't know how or why, but I'm apparently the only one who can see and listen to the damn nerd, which is just my fucking luck, right? Of all the people in the world who could be haunted by Deku's shitty ghost, it had to be me. He scowled bitterly, clicking his tongue. I have no reason to make this up. Why the hell would I want people to believe I'm the only one who can talk to Deku? Are you fucking kidding me right now? Katsuki asked, with exasperation as he saw what Izuku was trying to do. The boy was trying to lie down on the bed, clearly thinking that if his soul lied on top of his own body, he would be able to reconnect with it somehow. What's going on? Inko asked, green eyes widening again. And Katsuki low-key wished she would stop doing that, because the look was familiar in an uncanny way that made him shiver. Young Bakugo? All Might urged, equally curious. Katsuki paid them no mind, approaching the bed with an angry look on his face. You really think you can re-enter your body like that, you moron? He scoffed. What, you just gonna lie down there and wait until your shitty soul is pulled back into your stupid, tiny-ass body? Unfucking believable, Deku. He shook his head in disapproval. My body isn't tiny. Isuku protested, sitting up on the bed and making the sight before Katsuki's eyes, something uncanny to witness. At the same one, Deku lied down and covered in wires on the bed. Another, paler, slightly more transparent Deku sat down, making it look like his soul was actually leaving his body. Katsuki twisted his nose, not really comprehending why the sight made his heart speed up. "Get the fuck out of there. Having to see one of you is already enough." He gestured frantically at the boy. "Shit, never in my life I thought I'd be forced to deal with two Dekus. I'm pretty sure this is a nightmare designed to especially torment me," he huffed. Izuku rolled his eyes, but hopped off the bed anyway, looking upset. "Whatever. It didn't work anyway," he muttered sadly. "But I figured it was worth a try." "Young Bakuyo, I have to ask you not to speak in that way in front of Mrs. Midoriya." All Might scolded at the same time as Izuku spoke, making it difficult for Katsuki to pay attention to both of them at the same time. "Please show some respect for a mother in this moment." "Of course it didn't fucking work. If it was that easy, your crappy ghost wouldn't be standing around and making people think I lost my damn mind." Katsuki decided to answer Deku, because if there was one thing in which he excelled at was teasing the boy. At least, that was the only familiar territory he seemed to be able to trade at the time. He was being forced to deal with ghosts, near-death experiences, and the slight possibility that was actually descending into insanity. But in the middle of all this mess, teasing Deku and calling him names was the only familiar ground where he could step on. "Well, I'm sorry, Kachan, but I'm not loving this situation either," Izuku protested, looking exasperated. He scratched the back of his head nervously and looked at where his mother was still sitting, face more distraught than before. "Mom?" he tried, calling her attention again, to no avail. "Mom, please hear me," he begged, growing frantic. Katsuki scowled again. "She can't hear you, dipshit," he reminded Izuku with a frown. "Young Bakugo," All Might called him again. Unaware of how frantic and loud Izuku was growing, the boy's high-pitched voice was not only aggravating Katsuki's headache, but it was also getting on his nerves. "No one is questioning your sanity, but we should be careful not to give Miss Midoriya false hope." "No!" Inko protested, cutting the symbol of peace mid-speech. "I believe Katsuki. I have to believe him," she added in a wobbly voice, lowering her head. "I know," All Might nodded solemnly. "And I want to believe him too, but Mrs. Midoriya," he sighed heavily, full of grief. "Young Bakuyo went through a traumatic experience." "I'm not traumatized," Katsuki immediately protested. He didn't even remember what had happened. How could he be traumatized? And this could all be nothing more than an unhealthy way his mind found to cope with what he was forced to witness, All Might concluded, unbothered by his student's interruption. Katsuki growled, indignant. Even All Might, symbol of peace, hope personified, refused to believe him? Was there a chance he was actually crazy? "We need to convince them that we're saying the truth, Kachan," Izuku cried desperately. "They can't keep believing I'm dead." "They can't keep believing I'm crazy," he snapped, his head towards Izuku's distraught face, twisting his nose. Izuku looked at him with wide eyes that were identical to his mother's, but nodded after a beat. "Look." Katsuki took a deep breath to calm himself. Not that it was much of use. Pinching the bridge of his nose and closing his eyes for a moment before addressing All Might again. "Yeah, I get where everyone is coming from. I wouldn't believe it either. If some bastard woke up after bashing their head, saying they were seeing the ghost of someone who is brain dead. But one, I don't remember really what happened to Deku, so me seeing the shitty nerd can be a coping mechanism. Two, I don't even like Deku, so there's no reason I'd be traumatized if he died." He ignored the way Izuku flinched beside him. "And three, I don't think I'm crazy either, because this idiot literally tried to re-enter his body by lying down on the top of it. And there's no way my subconscious mind would ever be coming up with something so stupid. So he can't be a hallucination," he pointed out sternly. All Might seemed to be trying to figure out whether Katsuki's points made sense or not, and the hope in Mrs. Midoriya's eyes simply increased. Izuku fidgeted with the hem of his shirt as he nervously waited for a response. "We need to tell them something only I know," Izuku concluded, when All Might said nothing. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Listen, shitty Deku, I'm not gonna act as your personal messenger while you're in this ghost-like state, you hear me? He complained. But you're the only one who can see me, Izuku protested, indignant. We need to find a way to get me back to my own body. I don't give a shit. I'm not a delivery boy. If you want to have your messages relayed, you could get yourself a Yuji board or something, he shouted at the boy, well aware that for any outsider viewer, it looked like he was shouting at thin air. He wasn't really succeeding and not looking insane. What is young Midoriya saying? All Might asked, even though he still sounded like he thought Katsuki's story was too unbelievable. There had been a shift in the look in his eyes that indicated there was a chance he was giving the boy a vote of confidence. Katsuki groaned in annoyance at the question, knowing that if he didn't answer, he would not only be seen as an incooperative child, but his attitude would also be consistent with the one of a crazy person. He turned his head to look at the ghost Deku, who had an expectant look on his face, and then to Deku's body lying on the bed, still and pale. His eyes finally found Izuku's mom, and the tear tracks on her cheeks, and even though the sight didn't exactly soften his heart, he found himself unable to turn his back when he knew there were things he could do to help. What kind of hero would he be if he refused to aid those in need, even if it was shitty Deku with his annoying voice and bumpy lips? He said we should tell you something, only he would know, Katsuki responded with a puff. Not meeting All Might's eyes, he glimpsed at Deku, only to find a wide smile on his face, gratitude etched in his expressive eyes. Don't look so smug, nerd, Katsuki growled with an annoyed look. Turned his head so that he wouldn't have to face that bright smile. I'm only doing this so I can get rid of you faster, he muttered, even though it ended up sounding half-hearted. I know, Izuku agreed easily, and something about the way he agreed with that made Katsuki frown. If I'm going to say something only I would know, it can't be in front of my mom, he added pensively, before Katsuki could try to read the look on his eyes. You and All Might are the only one who knows about One for All, and she would freak out even more if she found out. Then why don't you just say something she would know about instead? Katsuki asked with an indifferent tone, shrugging. Kantan! Izuku protested, eyes widening. What don't I know about? Inko's head shot up, eyes suddenly sharp with attention. Mr. Toshinori? She turned her head to look for answers in All Might's face, when Katsuki didn't answer her question. She can't hear me, but she can't hear you, Izuku said, sounding almost offended. Katsuki turned his head away from the boy, having the decency of looking embarrassed for his lip, but putting on an angry scowl to hide that. Look, this isn't easy, okay? Katsuki argued defensively. It's really fucking hard to know what parts of your loosest rambling I should tell them or not. And I told you, I'm not a delivery boy. If you don't want me to reply to that shit you say without thinking, then turn on your brain and mouth filter for once. He ended up yelling angrily again. No. Let's calm down, okay? All Might said, gesturing with his hands in an attempt to ease Katsuki's increasingly sour mood. Don't tell me to calm down, you bony bastard, Katsuki protested. Just tell me how the fuck we can put Deku back in this shitty body so he can get the hell off my case. You won't be any help if you keep yelling at people, Izuku snapped, annoying with Katsuki's familiar grumpiness. I won't be of any help if you keep blabbering on my ear, Katsuki responded, so intense that his voice could probably be heard all over UA. Just tell my mom to go grab a coffee or something, so that I can convince All Might I'm not really dead, Izuku shouted back. You tell All Might that yourself, shitty nerd. I wish I could, but unfortunately I'm stuck with you as my only way to communicate with people. Well, I'm stuck with you as the shittiest fucking ghost in history of haunting. What on earth is going on here? A new voice entered their discussion, and Katsuki turned on his heels to find Recovery Girl standing at the floor. Katsuki's parents lurking anxiously behind her and trying to peek inside the room. He opened his mouth to answer, Izuku with a similar look beside him, but it was All Might who broke the silence. We apologize for the disruption, Shio, he said, walking past Katsuki in order to greet the small woman. But there are some news I believe you need to know about. The only thing I need to know is why one of my patients is out of bed. screaming like a spoiled child in the room of my other patient, he replied angrily, glaring disapprovingly at Katsuki. Katsuki tried to say, obviously taken back by the interruption, but All Might was faster than him once again. Young Bakugo believes there's a chance we might save Midoriya's life, he announced, and the way he said the words, sounding almost hopeful, differed so much from his disbelieving tone from just a few minutes before that the contrast made Katsuki frown. However, Recovery Girl was not so easily convinced. Her face fell into something akin to pity, and her shoulders slumped as she shook her head in disappointment. We talked about this, Toshinori, she said, sounding like she was scolding the symbol of peace. The diagnosis has not been changed. I can see him, Katsuki interrupted before she could continue, looking more serious than he had ever seen in his life. Recovery Girl turned to him with a puzzled look. Deku is standing beside me right now, he added solemnly. Recovery Girl watched him with sharp eyes. I know how this sounds, he continued, feeling the need to fill the uneasy silence in the room. But I'm not crazy. I don't know what happened, but for some reason, Deku is still around, and I'm the only one who can see him, unfortunately. He added the last part with a twist of his nose, just because it had been a few seconds too long since he had last teased the boy. He looked at Deku from the corner of his eyes to see his reaction, and found him biting his nails nervously, eyes glued on Recovery Girl's tiny form. Tell them I think the villain's quirk made my soul disconnect from my body. Deku had the audacity to phrase it as if Katsuki was there to obey his every command. Shut the fuck up, you damn nerd, Katsuki simply growled. I told you, I'm not your personal messenger. I had my doubts as well, All Might told the healing heroine, clearly trying to mediate the situation before Katsuki ended up sounding too much like a lunatic. But if you think about it, young Bakugo's story is not too impossible. Young Midoriya was hit with an unknown quirk, but he didn't die, he tried to argue. He is brain dead, Recovery Girl pointed out sternly, sparing Inko an apologetic look for his straightforwardness. Precisely, Alma exclaimed. Why did his other organs not shut off? Because Mrs. Midoriya refuses to turn the life support devices off, the healing heroine replied, matter-of-factly. Alma sighed. Yes, he sighed tiredly. But what I mean is, he pointed at Midoriya's body, lying on the bed. It is not impossible that the criminal's quirk caused some sort of separation between young Midoriya's body and his soul, for the lack of a better word. That's what I said, Izuku exclaimed triumphantly. Katsuki felt the irresistible urge to punch the nerd in the face, but did nothing. So, you really believe Bakugo sees and communicates with Midoriya's soul? Recovery Girls asked, one eyebrow picking in disbelief. I didn't put much faith in it until I witnessed a discussion firsthand, All Might explained, and Katsuki finally understood why the symbol of peace had finally stopped looking at him as if he was fit to be tied. Though I can only hear young Bakugo's side of the argument, it felt very similar to the conversations he usually shares with young Midoriya. It didn't look like the result of a hallucination or of a similar condition. Recovery Girl clicked her tongue, looking at Katsuki with a pensive look and analyzing from head to toe. After a few minutes of silent assessment, she pulled him a nearby chair towards the explosive boy and pushed him down on it without a word. What? He asked, taken aback by the sudden course of action. Sit still, she commanded, fishing a tiny flashlight from her pocket and pointing it at Katsuki's eyes. The bright light made him flinch, and he heard Izuku hiss from somewhere behind him. After checking his pupils, Recovery Girl continued to examine him closely, testing his reflexes, checking his head injury, and asking him a couple of questions to verify his cognitive abilities. By the end of it, Katsuki was fuming on the chair, putting in an especial effort on not allowing the tiny explosions at the palm of his hands to become too massive. He hated becoming examined. He hated people touching him without a good reason. Well, All Might asked, when Recovery Girl stepped away from Katsuki with a conclusive look on her face. His head injury looks better, she announced. He is so concussed, but it's nowhere near as bad as when he was arrived. He's well aware of his surroundings and seems very lucid to me, she sighed. But there is still a chance he could be hallucinating. It is not unprecedented for people to see a deceased loved ones after they die tragically. It is a common symptom of trauma. Deku is not a loved one, Katsuki immediately protested, unable to keep one of his hands from giving off a series of loud popping explosions. At the urgency to defend himself. And I'm told you, I'm not traumatized. I've got no reason to be. I don't give a shit about the damn nerd. Recovery Girl gave him a knowing look. Katsuki felt his stomach churn. I was the one who tended to you when you arrived last night, she said simply, calmly. I know what I saw. Katsuki protested furiously, not understanding why the women's words pissed him off so much. Then you're the one who's batshit crazy, you old hag, he accused. Kotan! Midoriya exclaimed, horrified. Bakugo! All Might reprehended indignantly, so furious at the boy's insolence that he puffed into his tall, muscular All Might form. It is not acceptable for you to disrespect an old lady like that. Leave it, Toshinori, Recovery Girl said with indifference, pulling yet another chair closer to the boy and hopping onto it. Her tiny legs dangled from the seat. Anger is also a common response to hearing the truths you don't want to admit. Now you fucking listen to me. Katsuki stood up from his seat, pointing an angry finger at the impassive old women. Now, young Bakugo. All Might, still in his muscular form, grabbed Katsuki's shoulder with more strength than necessary and pulled him back to his seat, holding him there. It is also one of the 7 stages of grief, Recovery Girl added simply, almost absent-mindedly. I'm not grieving the damn nerd, Katsuki protested. Denial is also one of the stages, she hummed pensively, paying the angry Katsuki in front of her no mind. She looked like she was trying to reach a conclusion. I'm not denying anything. I'm telling you that Deku is standing right here. He pointed at where Deku was standing, even though he knew no one else could see him. There is one way to figure out whether Bakugo needs a psychiatric intervention or not. However, she continued, as if Katsuki was as invisible as Izuku. She looked at All Might, a mysterious look on her face. After a few moments of staring at each other in silence, All Might reverted to his thin, bony form with a puff. Young Bakugo, he said firmly, with a heavy sigh. There was anticipation in his tone. Katsuki turned to stare at him, the man's hand still pinned on his shoulder. Can young Midoriya hear us, even if he can't talk to us? Katsuki turned to look at Deku, even though he already knew the answer. The boy nodded, promptly. Yeah, he can hear you, Katsuki scoffed. All Might leaned towards and whispered something in Katsuki's ear. After a few seconds, he stood back up, giving the explosive boy a serious look. You must follow these instructions to the letter, he reinforced out loud, squeezing Katsuki's shoulder pointedly. Even the whispering part? Katsuki groaned, complaining. All Might nodded. Everything, he confirmed. Katsuki groaned, sighed, rolled his eyes, and did all sorts of childish complaints before standing up from his chair and heading towards the door. Come on, nerd, he called, when Izuku didn't follow. Pushing the door open, he held it for Izuku, even though the boy could probably just phase through it in his ghost-like form. Where are we going? Izuku asked, nervous. He glanced back at his mother, who was still sitting at his bedside, holding one of her sons with an expected, teary-eyed look on her face. He looked unwilling to leave her. Just shut up and follow me, asshole, Katsuki huffed out an angry breath. When Izuku remained glued to his feet, he rolled his eyes again and left the room, allowing the door to slowly close behind him. Izuku spared his grieving mother one final, longing, conflicted look. I'll be right back, Mom, he promised, before following Katsuki out. Kachan, wait! Izuku called after him, as if the explosive boy headed back to his own hospital room. He didn't bother to deny his relief as he saw his parents were no longer there, having probably grown tired of waiting for his return from Izuku's deathbed. Once Izuku stepped into the ran after him, Katsuki closed the door and sat down on the bed, Izuku following him close and sitting beside him. "Look," Katsuki said angrily. But why didn't he sound angry? Not meeting Izuku's eyes or even bothering to look at him. "I'm just doing what All Might told me to. And the only reason I'm doing this, because the sooner we figure out what the hell is wrong with your nerdy ass, I'll stop having to act as your personal assistant. You hear me?" He huffed. Izuku lowered his eyes, a spark of disappointment flashing across his face. "Alright, Kachan," he agreed easily. "What did he tell you to do?" he asked curiously. If Izuku didn't know better, if he hadn't known that the person sitting beside him was Katsuki Bakuyo, he would have sworn on his mother's life that Kachan was blushing. But there was no way that could be, right? If there was one person who never blushed, that person was Kachan. Katsuki leaned forward towards Izuku, and the boy could feel his heart rate picking up, even though he was a mere astral projection. What the hell was Kachan doing? The explosive boy turned his head so that he could whisper something in Izuku's ear, and despite knowing that Izuku was nothing other than a ghost, a projection, an intangible spirit, Katsuki would have sworn he could feel the tickle of Izuku's curly hair brushing against his cheek. At the same time, Izuku could have sworn he felt the warmness of Katsuki's breath, making his neck tingle. Katsuki hesitated for a few seconds, his lips hovering just beside Izuku's ear. "You need to activate One for All," he whispered, voice low and soft in a way that Izuku had never heard it in all the years they had known each other. Even if there had been anyone else in the room with them, no one other than Izuku would have been able to hear Katsuki's words. Those words were meant for him and him alone. Katsuki's voice had always been loud as explosions. Now it was soft and gentle, like a breeze. Izuku had never thought such a sound was possible until he heard it firsthand, and it was endearing. Izuku allowed his eyes to flutter close and the power of One for All flow through his body. Once he was sure he had successfully activated his power, he stared down at his arms, but much to his surprise, they looked as normal as ever. No bright lines crossing them, no green sparks, nothing. He could feel One for All spreading across him, but he saw no signs of it. He turned his head to look at Katsuki, a confused frown on his face, only to find the same baffled look on his friend's face. "Does that mean—" Katsuki started, an unusual look of terror flashing in his eyes, but before he could finish that thought, a piercing scream made the two boys snap his heads towards the door. "Izuku!" Inka was screaming and sobbing from her son's room. "Midoriya, my boy!" All Might shouted triumphantly. Izuku and Katsuki turned their heads toward each other in perfect synchrony, eyes wide in anticipation. It was Katsuki who acted first, jumping off the bed and running back towards Izuku's room, only to find the boy's body still lying in the same position on the bed, but with green lightning enveloping his form. He had activated One for All. "I'm alive," Ghost Izuku whispered from behind him, sounding more baffled than anything. Katsuki turned to face him, and Izuku met his eyes. "Kachan, I'm alive! I'm still alive!" he repeated emphatically, as if that information was a surprise to him. There was a wide smile blossoming on his lips. "Heard you the first time, nerd," Katsuki bickered, turning his head away so that Izuku wouldn't be able to see the tiny smirk that appeared on his own lips. "Young Bakuyo, you were right," All Might cheered, pulling Katsuki into a tight embrace. "Young Midoriya still lives!" "Of course I was right," Katsuki growled, but didn't break from All Might's embrace. "I told you I wouldn't make something like this up." The fact that Midoriya managed to activate his power proves that he's not brain dead, and since he activated away from his body after we instructed him to, we can assume that you are not clinically insane. Recovery Girl tapped Katsuki on the shoulder, as if congratulating him for not being a total nutcase. There was a hidden teasing in her voice. "However, I would still like to keep you under my observation," she added mischievously. "You suffered a nasty injury and lost too much blood." "I feel fine," Katsuki protested, even though it wasn't quite true. He felt tired and achy, his headache getting increasingly worse by the second. I believe our priority should be figuring out what exactly happened to Midoriya, now that we know that he's still around us, Recovery Girl announced. However, she added, sending a knowing glance towards Katsuki, as if reading his thoughts. Mr. Bakuyo is still recovering and shouldn't have stayed so long out of bed. Go back to your room and get some rest, she instructed him. I will go see you in a moment. But, Enku protested, tears running down her face, if Izuku is still alive, shouldn't we work on making him better at once? She suggested meekly. We still don't know what exactly happened to young Midoriya. I will speak to Aizawa-sensei and see if we can collect all the existing information on any possible quirks that could cause this, All Might announced. He placed a comforting hand on Inko's shoulder. Mrs. Midoriya, I promise you that I will do everything in my power to bring our boy back. Thank you, Inko sniffed and sobbed, jumping from her seat and pulling All Might into a tight hug, which surprised even the man. Oh, thank you, and thank you, Katsuki. She rushed to Katsuki's side, pulling the boy into an equally tight embrace. He sighed, uncomfortable with all the uninvited touching he was having to go through on that day. Thank you for helping my baby. Yeah, whatever, he mumbled, glad to be released from the tight grasp as Inko took a step back, tears still running from her chubby cheeks. Katsuki looked away, not willing to face the greenness of her eyes. God, what was it about Midoriya's and their stupid fucking eyes? Katsuki wanted to say he hated them, but they evoked a completely different feeling. It seemed to be unnameable. To bed with now, you Bakugo, Recovery Girl ordered him, actually pushing him towards the door. You need all the rest you can get to recover and help us figure out how to help Midoriya. You will still need to make some research on the quirk effect to him, so you can get some winks. Fine, he huffed simply, without bidding any of them goodbye, or even looking back. He turned on his heels and left the room. Now that he had stopped to think about it, and now that he was sure he wasn't batshit, he could finally realize how ridiculously tired he was. He thought about asking Recovery Girl for some painkillers to help with the painful throbbing of his head, but the idea of having someone fuzzing over him at that moment wasn't exactly endearing. He would probably be fine after he caught some sleep. He hadn't expected Deku to follow him to his room. The fuck are you doing here? Katsuki asked, sparing Deku one quick disinterested glance before throwing himself down on his bed and passing an arm over his eyes unceremoniously. Izuku hesitated for a moment, standing awkwardly in front of the bed. I thought I'd check on you, he explained, half-heartedly. Check on me? You're the one with a foot on the grave, Katsuki scoffed. Or whole body, all things considered. Yeah, but... Izuku swallowed dry. He dropped his head before gathering the courage to look up again. Most of Katsuki's face was hidden away by his arm. You should ask Recovery Girl for some medicine for your headache, he suggested firmly. Finally. I don't have a headache, Katsuki lied in a flat tone without missing a beat. Yes, you do, Izuku argued as quickly. And how the fuck would you know that, shitty Deku? Katsuki scoffed, sounding tired and never admitted out loud to anyone. I just do, Izuku shrugged helplessly. Katsuki finally lifted his arm so that he could peek at the boy, suspicion etched all over his crimson eyes. He studied Izuku's face for a long time before speaking up. The fuck you talking about? Katsuki asked, defensive. Izuku immediately blushed. Nothing. I just mean you kept squinting at the light and your scowl looked worse than usual, and Recovery Girl say you took a bad hit, so it only makes sense your head would be hurting, he argued. Katsuki narrowed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to figure out whether Izuku was lying, but ended up resting his head back on the pillow and throwing his arm over his face again. Whatever, I'll just sleep it off, he said finally, as slightly as before. Ka-chan, Izuku tried to protest. Listen, Deku, Katsuki sighed tiredly, keeping his arm over his eyes. He sounded uncharacteristically tired, but familiarly pissed off. Just because I'm helping you doesn't mean we're besties. That doesn't mean we don't get to braid each other's hair, we don't get to talk about our feelings, we don't get to have sleepovers, and you definitely don't get to fucking tell me what to do. Are we clear? Izuku lowered his head, sighing. He looked to the side, a frustrated frown on his face. Yeah, he said simply, sounding almost disappointed. Now shut the fuck up and let me sleep, Katsuki added with a growl. And don't just fucking stand there and watching me nap like I'm some creepy weirdo. Go find something else to do, he instructed. But no one else can see me, Izuku protested miserably. What was he supposed to do? Precisely. Go pick at the girls' bathroom or something. Katsuki grinned. His mouth and the tip of his nose were the only visible parts of his face, since they weren't buried on the crook of his arm. Kachan! Izuku exclaimed, offended. I'm just teasing you, shitty Deku. I know you wouldn't do that. If anything, Katsuki's grin only widened at this protest. Izuku blushed, thankful that Kachan wasn't looking at him to see that. You wouldn't either, he stated simply, not looking at Katsuki. Even though he had expected the words to come out as petty, they ended up sounding more meaningful than he had first intended it. Nah, Katsuki responded simply, or I'm hiding his eyes from you. He said nothing else, and the subject dropped. Long moments of silence passed. Izuku watched pensively as Katsuki's breathing gradually evened out. He didn't know whether the explosive boy was asleep or not when he decided to speak up again, approaching a matter that had been bothering him ever since Katsuki had first woken up in a lucid state. You really don't remember what happened yesterday? Izuku asked, a melancholic tone in his voice. Katsuki sighed so loudly it sounded like a hiss. Fuck, you're still here? He raised his eyebrows, as if surprised by Deku's audacity to defy his order. No, I fucking don't. Just drop it. Remember what happened, or won't change with the fact that you're halfway dead. He scoffed. No use living in the past. Alright, Izuku agreed simply. He didn't know why Katsuki had forgotten, but maybe it was just a side effect to the head injury. Recovery Girl had said he was still concussed after all. Another series of silent moments passed. No other sound other than Katsuki's breathing filling the room. Kachan? Izuku called quietly after a while. Katsuki's growl was animalistic. Oh my fucking god, I'll swear I'll march down to your room and smother you to death with 100 pillows if you don't shut the fuck up right now, Deku. He threatened in annoyance, covering his face with both hands and looking like he was taking every ounce of his self-control not to explode Izuku's ghost in the afterlife. I just wanted to thank you, Izuku continued, unbothered by the violent display. In fact, he was almost used to it. For, helping me. I know you didn't want to, and I know you don't have to. So thanks, he said with sincerity. Of course I have to, you goddamn moron, Katsuki growled, turning abruptly and very exaggeratedly on the bed so that he wouldn't be lying on his side. It was almost as if he was trying to show Izuku that he wasn't up to a conversation. He placed his pillow on the top of his face to order to block the light from his sensitive eyes, and could possibly to also block the sound of Izuku's voice from his sensitive ears. He sighed before concluding, what kind of hero would I be if I didn't? Izuku watched him with adoration in his eyes. Katsuki continued to bury his face in the pillow, annoyed and unaware of the way Izuku was looking at him. Kachan, he whispered in admiration. Just let me fucking sleep, okay? This whole proving I'm not a basket case thing tired me out. Katsuki grumbled grumpily, punching the remaining pillow beneath his head as if to soften it, before dropping heavily on it. Go find someone else to bother, and get the hell out of here. Izuku lowered his head. He knew he wouldn't be able to go anywhere, even if he wanted to. He stayed there in silence, sitting on the farthest corner of Katsuki's hospital room, and very pointedly refusing to look at him. He failed to notice the way Kachan's constant grimace was replaced by a peaceful, relaxed expression that was so unusual to see on his face once he succumbed to a deep slumber. Guys, I hope you like this. This is chapter 2. I finally finished it. It took me so long to finish it, dude. Yeah, anyway, I hope you guys like this. I'll try to do the third part quickly, like next week. I just hope that you guys like this, and just subscribe to the channel. Give me some support to do this more often. Anyway, yeah, I read this chapter in archive on, by the way, and yeah, see you guys in the next one. Bye.